is producing a video at the moment of us making this engine stand. Well, obviously it's an important bit, but might be people that don't understand how important. So this is an engine which, when I bought all the stuff from Don Hill, came with it. It's a very good engine. It's called a Grand Prix Special engine, which means it's got 3 bearings instead of 2. And it was, it was the sort of next thing down from the supercharged engine, which would have had the same crank and everything. Right, this is it. We're going to put the 3 bearing Grand Prix Special engine together. I've had it together 2 or 3 times, but nice clearance on the front timing gears. This centre bearing, I can get it just right. I know what to do now, but the crankcase has to be hot. We're going to put the crankshaft in for the last time, and I've got to line that little hole up there so that nestles nicely in there, and that's where the oil goes down. That's the centre main. But luckily this centre main is nice and tight in the crankcase, which in this day, after donkey's years, is very unusual. Right. So it wants to come this way, doesn't it?
I reckon you ain't far off.
Let's have a look. No, that's pretty good. And again, you can tighten this up too much. So what I do is I tend to put it in, and then just that's tight enough, I reckon. I've had this crankshaft in 3 or 4 times and it's spun beautifully. Now it's gone tight for some reason. That's it. That's how it wants to be. That's it, done. Now I've tried the cross shaft in, and it's got clearance and it works beautifully. So, we can now put the rear main on, finished, which I haven't done yet. I've had it on, but not saying that's the end, because I'm going to Loctite it. Because if you remember rightly, this crankshaft was a bit undersized, and I was going to have it built up with chrome and that, and I thought, well, I'm a little bit doubtful about letting it out of my sight. So I've decided I'm going to Loctite it and see what happens, because it isn't going to do a colossal mileage, and I'll probably have it all to bits after it's run for a few miles. So I think before we get carried away and having it chromed and built up, and I think we just use a bit of Loctite. Well, we want to use whatever you reckon, really.
Instant gasket.
Yeah. This is the spanner what we made for tightening the rear main, because as you can see it's just got 2 little holes in it. So that goes on there, and you can tighten up the rear main with that. But we've got so many tools now, it's ridiculous. I'll keep making special tools. In fact, while we're waiting for John to put that stuff in there, have a walk over here, Tanya. That's the special tools that we made up just for doing the Sampson engine. That's for pulling the hubs off. That's for pulling the flywheels off. That's for turning the engine with electric drill to make sure it works nicely. And various other things that have got. You just can't do it. You can't do it with a hammer and chisel. That's why when we take these engines to bits, that's normally what they've been done with. So now, this has got a hole in it, just there, which lines up with a hole just here, all nuts, which are 12mm instead of 13, with a washer because they're going up against aluminium.
Look.
Ah.
All right.
Yeah, lovely. This is the nut that holds the rear main together. The special tools there, John. It's got Loctite on it. Now.
We just sort of do this back one right up now.
Yeah.
I think it's tight where you want it. Of course, the first time this heats up and cools down,
Yeah.
that'll all settle in, won't it? Yes, it's a bit tight. And that. Yeah. Yeah.
Can't leak,
No.
but
No, because it'll seal on the thread, won't it?
I mean, once the engine's been run and warm and everything, we can probably just go back and nip that up a bit more. Piston rings and get the cylinder block on.
That's tight enough.
What a lovely little engine, eh? When you think that was made in 1922. Amazing. And they supercharged this engine, same crankcase. The cylinder block was different, but it's all the same. They put the supercharger on those 4 bolts instead of the starter motor. They put twin magnetos on it because it had 8 plugs. And it did 114 miles an hour around Brooklands. So it must have been doing 120 miles an hour at times. And for 1100cc, I reckon that's fantastic. No wonder my dad thought they were so good. My dad reckoned they used to put them in a big lathe and run them round, and then take it to bits and look at every little bit to make sure that nothing was touching. Well, we haven't actually done that, but we've done pretty well that. We've got a special tool, which I'll get, which screws on there, like that. Well, didn't go exactly according to plan. But I think that's a good start. Lovely. Going to check these rings to make sure they've got clearance. But I'm pretty confident I've already checked that. They feel pretty good to me. So now we've got to decide whether we're going to put the pistons in there and then drop that on there and put the big ends on last, or whether to put the big ends in there and drop it down. But I think it'd be easier to do it because we've got a nice lead in here to get the rings in. So I think that's what we do, John, don't you?
Definitely.
And then we can put the old stuff on there. What it is, we put all this together and it all turns lovely, but there's very little clearance on the side, and I've decided I'm going to give it a little bit more, because when the oil goes in there, it's nice for the oil to be able to get out, because that's what keeps it cool, the oil flowing around. So I'm just going to give them a very gentle rub, just to take a whisker off. That'll be hardly measurable, that, but it will make a difference. On the two-bearing engine, you have to give that even more clearance, because when the crank bends, which is what it does, they go tight. Austin 7s, you used to have to give it a little bit of clearance there because it would seize up. That's how much we've taken off. I don't think it's going to make a fantastic difference, but it'll make a little difference. Terribly tight, which is a bit of a nuisance really, but it's how they come. And you've got to make sure that those little bits, when John's knocking them back, he's knocking them back to make sure that the bit that stops the bolt turning is nicely nestled in where it should be. Because once it's upside down and in the engine, you can't see that. But if you remember rightly, these rods came in the Don Hill stuff, and they were just a set of rods. So hopefully they're going to be all right, but I'd rather take a chance on them than the tubular rods, which we know are nearly 100 years old, whereas these are definitely not very old. I said, check them things good, John, because I tell you what, I was one short and I put a different one in, but it looked good. This is it now, the pistons that we've had in the family for 70 years, on and off, are going to go in the engine. Let's hope they're all right. As it happens, my mate Jeremy Jones sent me a page out of the Morgan Three-Wheeler Bulletin that was written by, I'll get it, and Jake Alderton, who is a very well-known bloke in the Morgan Three-Wheeler Club. He's written that lovely book about Morgan Three-Wheelers and their competition history, which, you know, you can read it a dozen times and still find things. But anyway, he's got an article about Martlet pistons, And it turns out that most of the motorbikes that broke any world records at Brooklands, which often happened, were fitted with Martlet pistons. Obviously, mostly with motorbikes. But it turns out that the way they're designed, the bit in here extends up to the crown of the piston, which in this modern day and age we don't worry about, but you know, in them days they're probably more worried. And it's supposed to take the heat out of there and put it into the sides of the piston, which probably works. But a very interesting article about them. And but I reckon they expanded a bit much myself, and I still, even though we've taken a bit off them, I'm still a bit concerned. When we first start this engine, we'll be very careful with it to make sure that it don't suddenly nip up. Because once an engine's nipped up solid, it can do so much damage everywhere. Years ago, on a Bugatti, you've got the magneto drive, and I was revving it up, and I leant across to do something, and my sleeve of my jumper got caught in the thing, and it ripped the sleeve off me, and stopped the engine, and it did so much damage. We had to take the cam out and straighten it, and you can't believe it. It was just like we'd thrown a bomb into the engine, and it was my sleeve. But I was bloody lucky it came off round my shoulder here, because if it had wrapped my arm in there, never did that again. I can see what we have actually got. You've done it? You'll notice we're not putting any oil on these piston rings. This is my pet thing. Most people say I'm wrong, a lot of people say I'm right, but I've done it all my life. Well, not all my life, but a lot of the time. And I reckon it takes a long time for a piston ring to bed in. And if it's covered in oil, it takes even longer. And very often when you go racing, like when I raced my Ford Escort, it only done 40 miles from taking it out the showroom. So, you know, didn't have a lot of time to run in. That sounded very promising, John. Isn't it? And listen to this. Now, if that had oil on there, it wouldn't be making that noise. I'm convinced myself that that's what you do. There's a little bit of damage just there, and we welded that up. So when we put it together, well, I think we'll put a bit of Tiger Seal on there, John.
Yeah.
My favourite stuff, repairing trim, gasket goo. I can't remember, I used it for something the other day that had nothing to do with anything, and it worked like a charm. I can't remember what it was though.
Shoe repair.
Oh yeah, I repaired my lovely shoes. I've got a pair of shoes that I bought from Jump the Gun, and they're my favourite shoes. You know, they've got tassels on the front and that. And I've had them for years, and I've had the soles redone, but the new ones was coming off. So I stuck them back with Tiger Seal and a clamp, and I can go out now. The good thing about me is I know I'm not very clever.
I'll let you get that out there, because it looks a bit tricky.
Yeah, don't you remember we heated it up?
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't think it's going to fall out.
Give it a warm, John.
It needs more heat. You've got a nice gun.
There we are, look at that, eh? Left over from 70 years ago. Because one of our followers said, if the gudgeon pins were worn, they couldn't be new. But then I looked at the thing, and I actually said, they look like new. I didn't say they was new. So, we'll see. One of our followers reckoned his dad didn't reckon them that much. So he might be right, because I must say I'm a little bit, you're going to get it on your hands. Well done. Now, this is a good little thing. My dad told me about this. He reckons that the ends of these blocks get pulled off because the crankcase expands. And he said you must elongate the holes. And if you show there, look, Tanya, you can see that we put it on the mill and we elongated the hole so that when that expands, it can slide rather than breaking the back of the block off, which is what happens. I've got several blocks that have been welded up. Now these nuts, they're by no means original, but they're lock nuts. And what happens is, when you tighten the block down, you don't want to go too mad. People tighten them down very tight. Well, these nuts don't come loose, but there's a good chance that when they've been on there for a little while, they work a little groove in there, and you can just go click one little groove, which is what we do. And of course, you don't need washers. So although they're not original, I even used them on my Bugatti and they were brilliant. Because people tighten these up too much. And that's one of the reasons I put Tiger Seal on there, is because it acts like a rubber gasket. And they, and you don't have to grouch them up. God, that does look good. I'm pleased to see them pistons in there. We should have painted the block, actually. I never thought of that. See, I can feel them little notches biting into the block. But you'll notice, look. Right, that's how tight that wants to be, in my opinion. Like that. And that will give it a chance. I've got to go to the dentist today and have a tooth out. And I'm going to have plastic teeth. It's going to take out the bridges that I've got. Going to have plastic teeth. Never had plastic teeth before. Ah, that feels beautiful. And then we can take that out of there, turn that over. Next thing, put the big ends on.